Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Developing a Successful Data Retention Policy. I'm Teresa Resick, Director of Webinars here at AIIM. My name is your host and producer of today's event. With me today are Craig Sjogren of HBR Consulting, and we also have Rich Lowers from HPE and Kelly Huckman from Iron Mountain. HPE is the underwriter of today's webinar, and we thank them for their support. And thank you for taking the time to join us today. As we get started, I just want to offer a few pointers for viewing today's webinar while I have a little bit of information about AIIM up on the slide right now. By joining our webinars live, you can customize your own viewing experience, so feel free to open, close, or resize the different windows. Across the bottom of your screen is the list of all of the widgets that are available to you today. You can download a PDF of the presentation at any time. Just look to the resource list that's to the right side of the slide area. There are also a few other documents and some links in there to help you learn more about today's topic. Feel free to ask questions throughout the hour using the Q&A feature, and that's to the left of the slide area. We will hold these questions until the end, where we should have about 5 or 10 minutes to answer them. You can also use this feature to comment or ask for technical assistance. At the end of the webinar, a brief survey will open up in your browser. We'd appreciate it if you take a few moments to complete it and offer your suggestions and your feedback, and you can also let us know what other topics you'd like for us to cover. You can also access this survey in the list of widgets across the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted to AIIM.org's Resources Webinars page in just a few days. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers that we have with us today. Craig Sjogren is a manager at HBR Consulting, and Craig is an information governance consultant, having helped many large companies improve their governance practices and technologies. His specialties include document and records management, information governance, and IT. Craig is also the president of AIIM's Midwest chapter. Rich Lowers is an information governance subject matter expert for HPE, and Rich has been working with content, document, records, and business process management for more than 15 years. His technical experience and business knowledge has enabled him to solve some of the incredible business challenges the growth and regulation of information possesses to companies. He's always looking to tell the story of how information management can help the individual and the company. And we also have with us Kelly Huckman, and Kelly is a consultant in information governance at Iron Mountain and also an attorney. So right now, I'm going to turn things over to Craig Sjogren to begin our conversation today. Craig?
Thank you. I don't have a ton of time. I have about as many slides as I have minutes, so sorry if I'm rushing through this a little bit. I spent most of my career as a practitioner, and the questions and statements you see on the screens are ones that I lived daily. Throughout my consultancy period, we hear this all the time. This is kind of the main drivers of a lot of RFPs we look at, and there's a lot of problems in information governance, and these are kind of some keys. So as I go through it, I hope to answer some of these concerns and kind of give you a layout of what the framework and the foundational elements are of building a policy and also rolling out a complete IG plan. So why do we care? There's a lot of reasons. The top 5 here, ones you've probably seen on every slide deck that talks about it. But an easy one is compliance. That's usually easy because it's mandated and the money seems to come, and you check it off and get it done. Not so much increasingly. There's discovery risk and cost. I think the cost is dropping quite a bit, and the next bullet point is kind of popping up a bit. So privacy is a main factor in why we care. It's a huge exposure to most companies, and that's increasing, and breaches and risks are also increasing in cost and complexity too. Efficiency, of course, make your things run better, faster without having so much garbage in the way. Storage savings, kind of the age-old, but when I say storage savings, I mean the fully loaded. So yes, you can get a gigabyte for a penny, but you have to back it up. You have to replicate it. You've got to do a lot of things with storage that don't quite make it into the storage is cheap equation. More increasingly, I've seen customer service as things have developed in the IG world. It's starting to become a differentiator between you and your competitors. So you have information, you can get to it faster. You can, you know where everything's at. You can get to it and help serve your customers a lot better. And then knowledge management and IP, we've seen a lot of growth in that as far as, making sure that their IP considerations are solid, that, you have the records to back up all of that, and, just everything's in order, and you're protecting your vitality of your future of your company. So it's not that hard. You just got to do these 4 things. Path forward is pretty clear. You just got to, check these off. However, that said, you're going to have some things in your way. I want to start with change management because I think that really is that and the communication gaps that I show here are kind of the 2 key reasons of failure with any project that I've seen in the information governance space. There might be other reasons too, funding and things like that, but if you don't get the change management right and you don't get people talking, you can't do much. And if you don't have funding, but you have those 2 things, you can still get a lot done in these categories. There's a lot of foundational elements that, you can work on yourselves internally that don't take a lot of time. They just take some thought. So some other things, budget and resources kind of lead into what I'm calling bleeding out. Most records managers, most IG professionals are, kind of putting pressure on the biggest leaks. And companies kind of need to go beyond that. There are a lot of leaks going on. So, first and foremost, you have to stop the bleeding before you can start to do some of this. So the first thing you want to do is start looking at, what governs your information. Obviously there's retention disposition requirements, but more increasingly there's privacy and security requirements, and those are starting to become very real. The Federal Rule of Civil Procedure requirements, IP considerations. If you have ISO certifications, there's lots of rules and ways that you need to keep your records. And of course your business requirements. So those things collectively start to get input into your foundational components. And so I'm going to list these out and start talking a bit about it. The IG/RIM policy is by itself absolutely nothing. It doesn't do, it does nothing more than check off a checklist, and similarly with the retention schedule as well. These 2 things alone, though, are not a program, even though that's generally where most people are starting. The RIM policy should have, kind of the necessary purpose, scope. I also think it should be very simple, not simple as far as the things it covers, but it should be readable. It should be something that employees and everybody can understand. Just don't make it so legally. Make it usable, make it readable. Same thing with retention schedule, and this is where most things fall apart. We have a retention schedule, and then companies go off and start to build things off of it, and then they find out that, geez, there's so many triggers in it, and there's 5,000 categories, and it has to be comprehensive, but it also has to be actionable and understandable. And I would say workable too. It can't just be a PDF that you go through and check things off. So the policy and the schedule need to be super simple, actionable, and you're off to a great start. Some other things with privacy, you got to make sure that you document your requirements for handling of personal information, medical records, credit cards, and things like that. Of course, retention limitations. More so, we're seeing a lot more maximum retention coming instead of minimum retention. So you can get into trouble by keeping things too long, which is something new to the whole records world altogether. And we have some cross-border considerations. I think we're going to talk more about that a little bit later. Rich, I think you have something on yours about some of this, so I won't talk much about that. As well as privacy, you have security. So a really key thing would be a data map, data flow that really opens your eyes to kind of where things are copies, where things are not supposed to be, and things like that. You have to know your flow of data and where things live. And a litany of technologies that you need to find out about and make sure you have, that you're checking for data loss prevention and access controls, of course, virus, things that propose threats to your information. And more increasingly, bring your own device policies. I would say right now we're kind of in the infancy of that. We have a lot of bring your own device initiatives out there, but people aren't schooled and the technologies aren't there. So it's literally you're bringing in kind of a dangerous weapon into the information world by bringing your own devices. So that policy has to be clear, just like everything else. You also want to look at your litigation readiness, make sure that you're stable there. So your legal hold policies and procedures, they've got to be documented and well thought out. Your e-discovery tools and collection technologies, and just your litigation profile together. It's great to know that, where lawsuits are coming in, how big the lawsuits are, things like that. So if you know your litigation profile pretty well, you also know where to focus, your actions to reduce the risk the best from a legal standpoint. Intellectual property, you need to be squared there. That's another area that, if your documentation isn't in order, you may lose money, you may lose a patent, you may lose a lot of things. And again, I say training, change management, all of these things. Any move you make is going to be a massive change to somebody's life. So change management to me is the critical success factor in anything we do in these. So we got one bullet down. You're defining your governance requirements. You're kind of laying the foundation, and you want that solid, and you want everyone approved, and you kind of want to think about all of that stuff on a cross-functional basis. So there should be people from everywhere giving input. Otherwise, it just won't work. So one way that we have been increasingly handling some of these problems is we go in and first you have to find out where the stuff is. You've got to find your silos. You've got to find your location. You've got to find, and it's not an easy task because you're going to find some things, HR has started a scanning program with an external vendor. All their stuff's living in the cloud. But you never know about that, So you really have to use that cross-functional group and really search, seek, do network scans, whatever you have to do to try to find out where this content lives. You'll find the big heavy hitters, but it's kind of an 80-20. You want to find just kind of where all your shared drives are, collaboration sites, all that stuff. And then identify what we call the content placement strategy. So is that stuff in its right place? Is it, a validated system, say if it's in pharma? Is it, on the right media? Is it, is the placement strategy well-defined? And then you have what we're calling content assessment. We do a lot of that a couple different ways. In the olden days, we did it manually, and I'm sure a lot of you on the line have done some of this. So it's, in a sense, a cleanup day, but essentially you're going through manually all the records, all the files, and just kind of pulling out, anything that's a copy or, that's old or just trivial. And you go through it, and it takes, 20, 30 years, and then you start again, basically. It's like painting the ceiling of the chapel. More and more, though, we do technology-enabled versions of this. It's a lot faster. You can take a lot bigger swipes. And we do this a few different ways. So we usually have some kind of IT tool that a client has that can go out and crawl. If not, there's usually some e-discovery technology, and we're kind of bordering on predictive coding and analysis there. But almost always we use some kind of file analysis software. And those do a couple different things. They have a metadata level scan, so these are kind of the more inexpensive tools. And we typically don't have one tool that we use. It just kind of depends on the requirements. Some of that's here, so it does a metadata scan at least, and we're thinking file name, date, owner. They usually attach to Active Directory so that you have deep ownership type analysis, when it was last modified, just kind of all the dates that you can right-click on a file and see. And I have quite a bit of that listed here too. When it gets a little more fun is when we get into the file content level. So now we're actually reading through and looking at the content. We're looking at keywords that are reappearing throughout those, and doing some almost predictive coding with some of this. Usually it's driven by keyword searches and things like that. So nothing really fancy, and what you really want to get out of that first swipe is that just barely good enough, the JBGE aspect of it. So you just get your eyes open to what you have. A lot of these will go into most repositories, so email, file shares, anywhere, SharePoint, of course, file sync and share sites, so Dropbox, Box, OneDrive, and also getting into the structured stuff even, so the BI and data warehouse environments. So here are the increasingly growing number of which I think is called file system analysis within the Gartner terms. They usually tackle 4 different aspects, so analytics, risk management, government, policy management, and efficiency. A lot of these are newer companies. Some have been around, some have been in the e-discovery world. But we generally pick from one of these to do some kind of eye-opening scan during most of our engagements. I am talking really fast. Just have time for questions. So here's one use case of how we've taken a lot of that. This use case was actually a demerger, but the process and the flow is still the same. So we map and discover the repositories once you find them. And then, you kind of look, agree on a tool, things like that. And then you review, you analyze. So you spend a lot of time just sorting through, different things about the files. And you try to take big swipes, so more often than not, we'll find a couple hundred gigs of just, old pictures or check scans or just things that you had no idea was there but are just, crushing your file server. And Rich, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, as a member of an organization that has gone through a couple of these, this is a fairly typical use case where the scanning tools really come into play quite well because they allow you to scan for not only the redundant, outdated, and trivial type of content, but also allow you to consolidate like file types or consolidate intellectual property or take other actions that are value add to the business while you're doing categorization and classification. It's really quite a good event when it comes to trying to do an identification of what your company's landscape looks like.
Yeah, and I tried for years to do it through just scripts and, just directory type dumps and things like that. And, doing it this way has opened more eyes than I could have ever thought just from even the simple, file scans. We do the same thing with creating like file plans and most anything that involves the whole bulk of the data, the scans have been extremely helpful in trying to figure that out. You at least know you have 16 petabyte of stuff, and you know what it is by the end of that exercise.
Well, and it also allows you to clearly identify those areas of the business that may have risky content, so you can prioritize when you're addressing them and how you're managing them.
Absolutely. And I think maybe I slipped over in the slide, but yeah, PII and things that you can pull out and kind of remediate separately, they do really well in those categories. So I'm a little bit ahead, but let's move on. Oh, and here's my slide. So if you need anything, if you have any more questions, I know I went pretty quick. Please reach out. I'd be more than happy to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. So I'm going to go ahead and, this is Kelly Huckman, I'm going to go ahead and add and extend on to what Greg's talked about. Really, there's this kind of chasm between the first mile, which is, developing a retention policy that's coherent and overarching, and actually getting to execution. When you're developing the policy, you need to take into account various government regulations and industry-specific regulations from, regulators like the SEC or FINRA or whatever area actually specifically regulates your industry. And also, as Craig mentioned, take into account organizational requirements for certain records and the capabilities of the organization's IT department as well. But actually marrying that with execution, there's a huge chasm between there. It's not so difficult with physical content. We've been doing this for decades. You can get box numbers and associate triggers and retention periods with various physical hard copy records. Where really it's difficult to get the rubber to meet the road is more related to digital content and just the breadth of digital content and different varieties of digital content. And it's extremely difficult for unstructured repositories and email, and somewhat less so for structured repositories. So what we need to do is we need to be able to collect the laws and then translate those laws into retention rules and create the policy. But then we need to be able to apply it organization-wide, and to be able to do it in an auditable way where we can defensively dispose of documents when we no longer need it. And above and beyond that, be able to manage the documents with, as Greg said, with these new laws regarding PII. So why isn't this typically happening? Why is it so difficult to marry policy to practice? Well, typically, policy or historically rather, policy hasn't been digitally connected to the content. A retention schedule might reside on a PDF or an Excel file, which is good enough for physical records. You can pretty easily apply it to big buckets of record classes, grouping like record types and documents, and sending it off site or storing it on site and giving a box code based on the period in which the records were created or accounts closed or whatnot, so you can defensively dispose of that record. But it's not married. It's much more difficult to marry it to a digital system, and it's a very complex and costly procedure. Just as Greg said, it's like painting or restoring the Sistine Chapel. If you don't automate it in a coherent way, you're never gonna catch up. So why is this? Why does this happen? Well, the origins of records management and information governance began with paper records, with physical records, where we've gone to this sort of big bucket approach and use that to classify like records with like retention requirements, and physically dispose of those records. That's less conducive to digital storage because you're dealing with unstructured repositories with email where you have records and data that can run the gamut, and it's very difficult to kind of place those things and to kind of defensively dispose of it. And there really haven't been many historically commercial off-the-shelf solutions to marry the policy with the actual implementation, with the execution, all the way from researching the laws to creating the rules to creating the policy and to applying that policy to digital records. There is a regulation that's coming down the line, and I'm sure most of you have heard about it, that is almost going to be, it's going to be difficult to comply with, but can almost be thought of as a boon or an opportunity for IG departments in order to get key stakeholder buy-in on developing and shepherding all the way through execution a comprehensive records and information management and information governance policy. And that's the General Data Protection Regulation. So this is an EU regulation that's self-executing, not like the previous directive that was adopted in 95. It doesn't require the various member states to pass legislation to enable it. It simply is, and it's been adopted. It was adopted in 2016. And the applicability of it is very broad, and the rights that it gives to EU to citizens, but it's actually residents, to natural persons that are EU residents, are extremely broad. It gives the right to be forgotten. It requires consent. It requires consent to process PII, or personally identifiable information, for certain purposes. And the consents aren't general. The consents have to be related to a specific purpose. And if you're not an EU company, you may be thinking, what does this have to do with me? Well, the breadth of the reach of the law is such that if you process EU residents' data, whether it be through the purchase or sale of goods or services, or whether it's relating to having employees that reside in the EU, or if you're monitoring the internet or otherwise activities of EU residents, then it's going to apply to you. And the real big driver for why this could actually get key stakeholders to pay attention is the risk of noncompliance are huge. The fines are eye-watering. It's 4% of global revenue for the parent company, or 20 million euros, the greater of those two. And I believe Rich had something to say as well.
Well, yeah, the eye-watering quote I think is the one I love the best. But realistically, just even the very nature of many organizations of how they transact with their customers really puts this into a position where it's very difficult to abide to the law without starting to ask your customers where they are in the world, so that way you can classify them or categorize them correctly and start to manage it to that granular level. And for some organizations, that's a tremendous burden. It's something that they don't do already today. So it's key to understand that scope and scale could easily drive down to organizations that don't consider themselves multinationals in most cases.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't adopted or enacted by technologists. The things that the regulators expect in relation to GDPR are quite a sea change from how many companies have been operating. It really shines a light on any sort of organizational chaos you have in relation to retention policies. So this is, as I said, it was adopted in 2016, but there was a 2-year moratorium that's currently still pending, and it's going to come into effect May 2018. And you're really seeing companies start to, the panic is rising as far as how they're going to address this in their ongoing retention policies. So what are the challenges that GDPR creates? Well, you have to first understand the scope of PII. It's not, a personnel file or, customer records. Generally, it's any piece of information that in conjunction with another piece of information can identify a data subject. So explicitly in the GDPR recitals, it relates to IP addresses, dynamic or static. It relates to cookies. So, the scope is quite broad. So, as an organization, you need to be able to identify what your PII is, and Rich will talk about that a little bit later, how to actually operationalize that. But also determine the format in which they're stored and where they're stored. And then you need to be able to isolate it. You don't want PII really residing with other sorts of records because you're going to have to treat it differently, both from a security standpoint and from a retention standpoint. And then it's going to be extremely useful in order to meet your compliance obligations to be able to classify the PII, to be able to say this is where it resides, this is who uses it and for what purposes, and these are the sorts of data subjects this particular PII relates to. And then you need to be able to apply retention times for the personal data. Because, you do need consent, and, that's the next point. You need to obtain and retain explicit consent. And like I said, it's not general. It's related to a particular purpose. But lacking consent, there can be other ways for you to retain or process data. If you're, for instance, in the jurisdiction that you operate within, you're legally required to keep the data. That can serve as a legal reason to keep the PII for the period in which you need to retain it. So you really need to have a retention schedule and marry it to where the PII is located and what PII it concerns. Because you might lack consent, or if data subject at any time withdraw consent. You can withdraw consent regarding particular purposes, or can withdraw consent wholly and just ask to be erased. And they can amend. They can ask to see their personal data so that they can amend it to make it correct. All of these rights really have to do with you needing to know where PII is located. And just again on consent, for instance, if you got PII from say a customer who purchased a good and they consented to using that for processing that, well, that consent does not necessarily give you the right, and actually doesn't give you the right to use that data in a non-anonymized way for marketing purposes. So it's really important to know in what way you can process a particular data subject's PII. And so that leads to, first identifying the PII, which Rich will talk about, and what doesn't contain PII within data sources, which are applications or databases, that repositories that might store any sort of record or data. And then, for the PII data, we need to know the processing purposes so that we can know who within the organization should have access to it. And if no one should have access, if all consents have been withdrawn and there's no other legal reason to obtain the data, then it should be deleted or returned. And then we can also, during this process, map the non-PII data sources to those within the organization that deal with this, either a group, division, or business line, or the curators, the custodians or stewards, those who are responsible for the content of the database, or those who are responsible in IT for keeping the database. And then we want to marry all of this across the board to the record class taxonomy in an ideal situation so that you can inform how the retention requirements, the rules based upon legal citations affect the particular data sources, the particular documents within your repositories. And, doing this for privacy, it gets you 90%, 95% of the way to an e-discovery map already if you're doing it for non-PII data sources as well. And it can also inform a coherent e-communications strategy as well, because when you're talking about data sources, you're not just talking about repositories, you can also be talking about applications, email-enabled applications. So you can inform how to keep and the duration to keep particular communication applications based on their mappings to the record class taxonomy. So, I mean, it really can serve as a boon to create a coherent strategy under the auspices of complying with the GDPR, and you get all of these other benefits. So, finally, I mean, all of this that I've been talking about is still sort of the theory, the first mile. We're creating a retention schedule. We're representing an organization structure and map various data sources to that organizational structure and record classes. But that still doesn't, get us to the content. So how do we get to the content? Well, we need to use enterprise content management suites to manage not so much the physical content. We have methods of doing that. That's been in the core competency of AIIM for ages. But we also need to be able to manage the digital content, the email, the unstructured repositories, and the structured repositories. And that's where I'm going to leave off with Rich. And he can talk more about how to actually go from the policy and the legal requirements to the actual operationalization.
Well, the good news is that we've been managing technology for quite a long time and managing data with that technology for a very long time. And the maturity of the technology scope on this has really been a boon when it comes to being able to manage electronic content, primarily because of e-discovery. Exactly what Kelly mentioned. While the law may not have been written by technologists, it certainly can be facilitated by technologists. And in fact, the ability to do that exists, right? The ability to scan and analyze data, to be able to classify and categorize that information, and being able then to act on it in an automated fashion. It exists today, and it's available to us. And I think that from an industry perspective, I think that while records management and information governance may have been lacking a lot of attention, I think that this is a day and age where we have quite a bit of services available to us, and we really should take advantage of them. This particular diagram really kind of illustrates the process from a compliance standpoint that's available to us. But let me drill into it a little bit more here. GDPR is a really good example of being able to take the laws and regulations that are being imposed on organizations and implement those laws and regulations in an automated fashion from a technology perspective, being able to clearly identify the type of information that is personal and identifiable, to be able to act on that information in an automated fashion, and also to be able to track that you've done everything you're supposed to. This particular diagram really kind of talks about the numerous number of repositories that are available from an analysis standpoint. The technology is available to analyze that content and to clearly break it down, and then in an automated fashion for either promoting it as record or for identifying it as a non-record and something that's inconsequential and disposing of it. So what's a typical process when it comes to that? Well, really, it's visibility into the data, right? Being able to know and act on information in a concise and positive way, and also in a documented way, right? So that way you can show to your regulator or even to your stakeholders that you're managing the information in an appropriate manner. And the technology that we're talking about today is something that has been around for quite a period of time. It's interesting because we have a question about structured data too. This diagram may talk about unstructured data as kind of the primary, but it is also available from a structured data standpoint, and I'll talk a little bit about that. The partnership that my organization, HP, has with Iron Mountain is really what has allowed us to leverage this technology capability and utilize this technology capability across the board, and being able to take the legal citations and connect them directly to the retention conclusions that the business is making and connect them to the actual actions that the technology takes. That first mile of the actual citations and that last mile of the documented actions, it's incredible. It's something that has really never been done before. And from an organizational standpoint, it's not just a multinational that needs something like that, especially when we're talking about rules like GDPR. I think it's critical to understand that data could be in any type of organization. If anybody has any questions, again, related to the Hewlett-Packard technology that's available to do these things, and also maybe wants to take a GDPR assessment and understand how your organization is positioned to either facilitate complying to this law or maybe not complying to it, this is a great web tool, and it's free, so you can go ahead and do that. This is the contact information for Kelly and I. Go ahead and feel free to email us or call us. If I can't answer the question, I'm sure Kelly can.
Well, thanks. We've been listening to Rich Lowers of HPE and Kelly Huckman from Iron Mountain, and Craig Sjogren from HBR Consulting kicked us off today. We do have a lot of questions that have come in here, and we have a nice chunk of time for answering them. So I'm just going to dive right in. And just to refresh everyone's memory, GDPR. Kelly, if I can start with you to just spell out what the letters mean, and just to say that one more time.
Sure. GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulation, and there's a difference between regulations and directives in the EU. A directive is something that the EU enacts, and then it doesn't have the force of law within the member states. It needs to have enacting legislation within all the member states to make it apply, whereas the regulation does have the force of law. And the regulation in question, it covers EU residents, and it obviously covers organizations that have branch offices or their organization locuses within the EU, but it does apply to U.S. and Canadian and any other countries, so long as they're dealing with personally identifiable information of natural persons that reside within the EU. And like I said, the GDPR is, I guess eye-watering is the best adjective to use for the penalties that they're going to try to inflict on organizations, and you're going to have data protection agencies within each country that are going to be going after marquee names once this comes into effect in May 2015, because they're going to want to stress that they are serious about personally identifiable information, about privacy. So definitely something to take to your key stakeholders if you at all deal with EU residents' information, because I think it will open their eyes as to IT priorities.
I know I've hosted a few webinars already on the GDPR, and I know I'm going to have more coming up in my calendar. And for me, being in North America, what strikes me most is just because we have our members' information. Because they live in one of the 28 member states of the EU, that's something that as a North American, a small company, AIM, as a small business, that's something that we're also very concerned about this. And then I'm also aware that even though Brexit is going on in the UK, it's still going to greatly impact UK-based companies as well, because, again, their customers or they have information, that personally identifiable information for people who do reside within the EU. So even though it originated in the EU, it definitely is having global implications. So definitely something well worth keeping in mind. Craig, I want to direct a couple of questions your way, because coming back to the heart and soul and basics of retention policies and on the records management side in general, someone is just asking what's a recommended time period to review and update a retention schedule? Craig, can you come off of mute? Might have lost Craig there. Rich, can you go ahead and answer that?
Sorry, I was on mute. I'm back. Of course, the answer is it depends. I mean, if you have, was the question to update and what? What was the other part?
How frequently to review your retention schedules?
Yeah, typically we say every couple years. I think there are products out there that kind of keep a lot of it, at least the rules and regs. Rich can probably tell you some more about that, but the rules and regs. But yeah, to update, typically we see a 2-year cycle, and there's changes kind of going on throughout those 2 years as well. So it's kind of always updated, but the rules and regs at least every couple years.
Okay. Someone's asking, and Craig, I still want to direct this one to you,
Okay.
in that the data retention plan, in what ways should a data retention plan be different from a classic records retention policy plan? Is there a difference in how we should treat the structured versus unstructured, or is that a hair-splitting issue?
No, it's actually it's usually a pretty big problem. I actually see a few questions kind of on data retention as far as structured retention. And the problem there is you don't have that distinct digital object. You don't have the context. You don't have the, that point in time. So the times that we've done kind of full across the board system type remediation, it goes pretty slow, because you can mess up systems as you pull data out. We first make sure that there aren't any outputs, reports, records that would support that. But yeah, it's kind of a one-off on each system to, go through and just try not to break it, but pull out the risky data and make the system run a little faster. Did I answer that question, Teresa?
Yes.
Okay.
Rich, I want to ask the next question of you. Someone's asking, in what way can auto-classification tools help a records management practitioner to help them comply with the GDPR, regardless of the size of the organization, large or small? How can auto-class tools help with that? Actually, unfortunately, we might have lost Rich here because he was having some phone issues. Kelly, can you take that question?
How can auto-classification, I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah. How can auto-classification tools help practitioners, records managers, to comply with the GDPR regardless of the size of the organization?
Well, if Rich would be here, I think that he would say, with their control point, with HPE's control point, you do an initial scan, and you can do follow-up scans as well, or you can keep it in maintenance to do scans in real time of both structured and unstructured databases. And it really has some kind of analytics, not AI or anything like that, but it really can do a great job of identifying based on, you can programmatically using a learning algorithm to show, what is or what does contain or not contain PII. And then you want to segregate those databases. So that's one way in which kind of analyzing it can help you find where a PII is or where it is not, and then HPE can validate that, a certain database does not contain PII. So the first pass, I believe, is going to be through metadata fields that are associated with certain files. And you can say, these sorts of file types don't have anything to do with PII, or, these certain file types are highly suspect and they might contain it. And then they have, myriad, hundreds of connectors that can kind of connect with different databases and kind of troll through the various metadata fields related to entries or files and determine with a great deal of accuracy what contain and do not contain PII. And if metadata isn't enough, you can go through again, and obviously it's a somewhat slower process, but actually analyze the content of the files themselves.
Thanks. Craig, I want to send the next question your way, because someone's asking for, and I'm kind of summarizing this and blending a couple of questions together on this because I'm seeing this theme coming through here. Someone's asking if they have a company that does not have a records management department or records manager on staff, or if having a records retention schedule is not a high priority within the organization, or they've not reviewed their record schedule in years and years, shoestring budgets, all of those kinds of obstacles that so many companies have. How does an organization start or begin updating and addressing retention? Can you talk a little bit of some practical steps to help people get going on that?
Well, first off, so when I started consulting 5-6 years ago, I kind of assumed that everyone had at least kind of the fundamentals down, and that's not the case. So you're not alone, and especially even in the Fortune 100 world, you'll still find some areas where records management just isn't, looked at all. First, you got to build the business case. There are a lot of things, a lot of free resources on AIIM and ARMA that can help you build kind of the ROI, the business case. But you got to get somebody focused on it before anything can happen. There's a lot of ways to calculate the ROI on all the facets that we presented on today, but you just got to get to it and find a champion that will listen, that has some power to make things happen, and just lay out the scenarios. What happens if, our system is breached and we have all this extraneous data that goes out there? Kind of use a lot of scare tactics. They seem to work well. They're pretty clear. They've been all over the news. And if you're in an industry that, could lose substantially from that through reputation and just sales, and your business case starts to become really clear and people start to perk up.
And I've also heard other organizations say that the way that they help succeed in that is to tie this to what the organizational objectives are this year, this quarter.
Absolutely.
As a way to get the attention of senior executives.
Yeah, the first thing we do when we roll in there to a client that's kind of in a barren environment like that is we do exactly that. We start to look at mission statements. We start to look at your guiding principles, and everything we do is tied, to one of those, because it just resonates up, like you said.
And I want to squeeze in one more question. Was that Kelly?
Oh, Teresa, I just wanted to add on to. I don't know if I can do a plug, but I know that Iron Mountain, we do offer some off-the-shelf schedules and things like that pertain to particular areas, healthcare, finance, et cetera, or just general business entity. And it's a good starting point, and it's not enterprise level, so it doesn't have an enterprise level price. But you don't have to start from scratch or kind of do a bespoke retention schedule or policy. There are resources out there with Iron Mountain and other companies where there are affordable alternatives. So.
Yes, definitely. Craig, I want to squeeze in one more question here, and I realize that there are more questions than we can get to today. But someone is asking that, and this is an ROI cost balancing issue. How do you, if someone has that retention plan and if for that shorter retention cycle, a couple years, maybe 5 years, how do you justify spending the time and effort to go through the process of imaging and indexing and all that is involved if the document's going to be destroyed in just a few years? Because that is, whether that's the regulation, the legal requirement, that's what the retention schedule says. How does someone help make that case that it's worth the effort?
We have a pretty detailed image or not flow. Chances are you don't need to scan it. I mean, if it came down to that, I would much rather spend the time and resources fixing the paper problem and just kind of let the paper die on the vine. But if you're scanning it for a reason, so you're doing it for disaster recovery, you're doing it for to kick off a workflow. There are a lot of reasons to scan other than just to store. And if you're just scanning to store it for a few years, I say don't scan it.
Okay.
Pretty simple, I know, but you're scanning it for a reason, and if it literally is just a store, your effort is much better spent, just focusing on the process that's generating that paper to begin with.
Good point. Craig did mention that there are a lot. Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I just wanted to, kind of talk about a concept that dovetails with that. As far as PII, the GDPR has these concepts that are, privacy by design or privacy by default. Whenever you're creating, applications or databases, you need to focus on only pulling in, information that is going to be used for the purpose of the process that you're trying to achieve, and not pull in information. There was a question about how does data kind of relate, how does PII data relate to records? Well, PII by its very nature needs to be a record, because if you don't have a use for that, if it's just sitting there, unconnected to anything, unconnected to any process or purpose for that data, you don't need to be holding on to it. You need to not have it. So that kind of is the concept of privacy by design and privacy by default. You need to not have this data if it's not necessary for some business process that the client has, or the data subject has consented to.
That's a very good clarification. So just wanted to, we are getting into the close of our webinar hour, and Craig did mention that there are a lot of resources available, and one of them is AIM training. And there's a variety of different, whether it's electronic records management, information governance, our general ECM program. There's a wide variety of training on the AIM's website, and there's a link to this in the resources section. And many other resources that are out there. But these training programs, and I've sat through a number of them myself, they are very helpful and can help you bring that focus and clarity as you need to bring this information into the organization. So I do encourage you to check that out. In addition, in the resources area, there was the GDPR Assessment and some other really good information. If you just click on those links, they're going to open in another browser tab, and you'll just have them for you for when the webinar is over with. Also, we are recording the webinar. It will be available in a day or two back up on the AIM website. So come back, check this out again, invite your colleagues to listen to it. And also the reminder of when the webinar does end, a little survey is going to pop open, and I greatly value your feedback and would just appreciate if you would take a few moments to complete that survey for me. And so as we are at the end of our webinar hour, and I do think we lost Rich Lowers from HP with his phone connection. And so I'm going to ask each of our other speakers for their closing thought or a key takeaway. So I'm going to start first with Kelly Huckman from Iron Mountain, if you can offer your closing thoughts today.
Sure. My takeaway would be to, key-level employees might think of the GDPR and other regulatory, schema as, obstacles, but really in the IG department, we can kind of think of them as opportunities, as boons that can get funding for our particular departments and really kind of open the eyes of those who can make the calls and to force through change management to really address these issues with the seriousness they deserve. Think of it as an opportunity.
Thank you, Kelly. And Craig Sjogren from HBR Consulting, your closing thoughts today.
I'm going to go back to what I said before, and that the two key reasons for success in rolling these out are change management, and that can go. Of course, there are methodologies around that, but really, you just want to try to get people taken care of, excited, and ready for the change, and also communication. And even if you have no budget, you can get in for a long time and just meddle within procurement processes and, slight changes that you change up front that can really help kind of the whole enterprise and at least stop the bleeding. That should be your first goal, is to try to stop that bleeding. And keep it simple.
That's a good part there. Very much want to thank our underwriter, HPE. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs. So thank you, Hewlett-Packard Enterprises, for your sponsorship. I do value that. And that is all that we have time for today. For AIM, this is Teresa Resick, and we will see you on our next webinar. Have a great day.